Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm the owner of Looking Inwards and a senior meditation teacher. I'm here to talk to you today about grief. Living in an area surrounded by protected national forests, I have the pleasure of encountering a lot of wildlife every day. Sometimes, though, it is tragically on the side of the road, injured or worse because of a car collision. I learned a few life-changing things about grief from these encounters with wildlife and from the people who help them. And I want to share one such story with you now. Driving along the roads lined by Dandenong forests, I spotted a collected echidna on the side of the road opposite me and did my usual mental dance. Should I stop and go and check it out myself? Do I feel up to looking? Can I be late to whatever commitment that I have? Should I just call Wildlife Victoria, report the location and keep driving? And as always, I did a U-turn, decided to go back and check out the injured wildlife myself. I pulled over with my hazards on, checking for cars. I donned my gloves. I grabbed a small towel and I proceeded to cross the road towards the echidna. Upon approaching her, I felt a heaviness in my chest and a sadness like a fire in my heart. I picked her up and felt the weight of her in my arms. As I carried her off the road and laid her down, I collected a bouquet of flowers and laid them atop of her in an arrangement and said my funeral blessing. As I walked back, calling Wildlife Victoria to report the location for a volunteer to check on her, I imagined that along the side of the road were hundreds upon hundreds of little crosses representing all the wildlife that had been collected and killed on this road. I knew that I would always think of this little echidna driving around this particular bend on my route home. So as a meditator and a meditation teacher, my predominant concern when facing difficulties like this and helping my students face difficulties is how can I be okay with this? Moving with the flow of life and what reality presents to us doesn't mean being unaffected, just accepting everything. It means feeling what we feel, noticing it, learning about ourselves while we do it. So I'm going to share the 3 biggest things I learned about grief when encountering these wildlife over the past few years. Number 1, grief can be a doorway. A step to take is to begin acknowledging your emotions surrounding your loss. It is good to feel in the face of loss and death. An emotion can be a doorway to learning more deeply about yourself, becoming more resilient, and experiencing life in a richer way. As a teacher, I encourage my students to sensitively and with discernment dip their toe into feeling and allowing their emotions surrounding their loss. Even beginning by just acknowledging what you feel in response to this event or trigger. Importantly, is to do this in a way that feels safe, such as with the support of a trusted person alongside you, such as a meditation teacher or a mentor or a counsellor or a friend. So for me, what did I feel when facing these wildlife? I felt responsible, not individually but collectively, because my species and specifically my European ancestors are notoriously egocentric, denatured and short-sighted, historically to catastrophic consequences to our environment and the other human beings and beings that inhabit them. I felt sad for the unnecessary and arguably unnatural wildlife deaths caused by roads and traffic every day in Australia. I felt helpless about how to make an impact and prevent it. These responses make me hyper aware when I'm driving, especially at night and in areas close to vegetation, so that I follow the common precautions of always slowing my speeds and using my brights when driving. But above all, I feel connected. All emotions and responses that we have are seen in applied ecopsychology as webstrings. Applied ecopsychology was developed by Dr. Michael Cohen, and webstrings say that our feelings and experiences are a connection or string that links us to our environment and the world around us. So they serve a purpose. My grief and responses to seeing these wildlife are a doorway to my connection with nature, and the human connection with nature, not just mine, and my connection with these living beings and these Australian native wildlife. If I felt nothing, on the other hand, when seeing these injured or dead wildlife on the side of the road, then my doorway to connection with nature may be closed or damaged or in need of some work and repair. And so in meditation, the emotions around grief are opening to learning. Learning about one's love for nature, for example. If I had denied the feelings, gone into resentment or anger, I might have glimpsed the connection to nature, but only a glimpse. It would still have been clouded by emotional and mental chaos, rather than surrounded by stillness and peace of heart, as my encounters with nature have and wildlife have eventually become. So number 2, the sadness is the connection. A step to take here is to commemorate your loss meaningfully. A teacher of mine gave me an inspiration during this healing process by suggesting that a blessing or a prayer for the wildlife I encounter may help me. So this is what I do. I make sure to stop, pull over, no matter my obligations. I move the wildlife, as Wildlife Victoria suggests, using gloves and a towel, off onto the side of the road. I call Wildlife Victoria and get a volunteer to come and have a look at them. And if sadly the wildlife has already passed, the possum, echidna, wallaby has already passed, I give them my funeral blessing. And so here it is. May you rest in peace. May you be free of pain. May your body and life nourish the earth. May you be held forever in loving consciousness. I think it's important here to note that the third line, may your body and life nourish the earth, is a kind of theological observation. So although we address that the animal's body is belonging to it, your body, it's arguable now that without the consciousness animating and living in the body, that the body does no longer belong to the possum or echidna or wallaby, but belongs to the earth now. Like a fallen autumn leaf, it will break down and nourish the soil and surviving life around it, like insects, birds, and bacteria. Does its soul, spirit, or self live on in the cells or atoms that are regenerated or broken down, or does its soul, spirit, or self travel somewhere else in death? This is something philosophical you may like to ponder around grief. So emotions can be healed and softened by truly being with them, sitting with them, breathing with them, one by one. They are not linear or a checklist. You are not going through a step-by-step process, ticking things off when you grieve or when you go through anything in life, in my feeling. They can be cyclical, sometimes happening out of order, sometimes happening over and over, sometimes strongly feeling, sometimes softly feeling. But being with the emotions around grief long enough, and by being with them long enough, we may realize that love and connection is the driving factor in our lives, in ourselves, and love and connection is our true nature. So from being with our emotions around grief, maybe a purpose or action that we can take for our grief will arise. So we could consider 3 things here. If I could communicate with the thing I've lost, what would I want it to know? If it could communicate with me, what would it want me to know? And lastly, what action or purpose might arise from this wisdom? And so here the title of the second part, The Sadness is the Connection, comes from Rumi's poem Love Dogs, which is a beautiful poem. It's very long. I'll include a link to it in the description below, but I will just read the last part of the poem, which I hope to Rumi lovers is not a castration or bastardization of the poem Love Dogs, but I'm just going to read a small snippet of it and link it down below for you to read in full. So this translation comes from Coleman Barks. Why did you stop praising? Because I've never heard anything back. The longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them. So 3, suffering happens and the world does care. Step to take here is to connect with others about and around your loss. Scott Peck, in his book The Road Less Travelled, talks about life becoming considerably more joyful when one can accept that life will be hard, and that this acceptance will save us a lot of misery. When we are presented with life's hardships, I think it's a mistake to take away from them that they simply shouldn't be there, they shouldn't exist, they should go away, instead of, and rather than, bolstering ourselves to be more resilient. So we blame the seeming cause of the pain rather than learning stronger management techniques and better management techniques to deal with this pain sometimes. So asking, how can I understand the reality and inevitability of a loss like mine? If I take the example of roadkill in Australia, then I can understand that the inevitability of injured wildlife on roads is because Australian roads are typically not built to accommodate the traffic of wildlife. If we built road crossing points to accommodate wildlife crossing, then it would be logical that less deaths would happen, and less deaths should happen, logically. If we don't have these wildlife crossings, then we must understand the likelihood of this loss and these deaths and face up to how to deal with it or reduce it. And understanding this reality does not mean accepting it or giving up or just laying over and taking it or feeling helplessness. Understanding it means having a deeper connection and being able to process it and take action in a more meaningful way. So for your own losses and grief, a new perspective is almost impossible to create alone, especially in difficult times. So reaching out to connect with a trusted person to talk about it and heal through it is vital. We can gain a different perspective. In still mind meditation, we look at things through a lens of reality. So we can see that both an emotional, human-centric lens about what we're feeling, our feet on the ground, what's going on, what we're seeing, what we're feeling is really important, as well as a realism-based lens like this logical perspective of why is this happening, why logically it should happen, and what we can do about it. All these things are needed to allow us the appropriate space and mechanisms to heal. So lastly, for all the too many wildlife that I have encountered along roads. I feel your pain and passing and will not ignore or numb myself from a deep response of love and sadness for your suffering and loss. I will strengthen my capacity to feel grief and to go through the processes of grief and allow it so that I may look at and not away. To the rangers, volunteers and locals I've encountered who deeply care for wildlife, I am so grateful for your full hearts, open hearts, commitments to nature and to our fellow beings on this land. And thank you for the strength that you instill in me and the community. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more of my guided meditations and reflection videos, and feel free to check out my website to get involved in any offerings upcoming, looking inwards. Thanks. Take care.